All right. Now coming to security group. Security group, as I said earlier, it's very, very important to understand. So it's a fundamental of network security in AWS. So you've got your EC2 instance. So any instance that you create, they're always created within a security group. So the security group will define what sort of traffic is incoming and what sort of traffic is outgoing to that instance. You can have multiple instances within a security group, and you can have multiple security groups attached to an instance. So both ways. The security group only contains allow rules, so they don't deny the traffic. By default, everything is denied. But as you start opening up your security groups in terms of your ports, in terms of your TCP/IP or UDP or any protocol, so then you start allowing things. Then you start allowing traffic from external to reach your EC2 instances. But by default, everything is denied. So security groups can be referenced by an IP or by another security group. So now security groups, they are acting as a firewall on the EC2 instances. They will always define as to which traffic can connect it. So for example, if you look at the different types here, so you've got HTTP, you've got the protocol as TCP, you've got what is the port range, which port is open, what are the different IP addresses that can reach the service, right? And then the description. So let's say if you need an SSH traffic, you need to open a TCP port of 22, which is a very standard SSH. HTTP is a standard of port 80. HTTPS has a standard of 443. But you can also create your own different rules. So let's say if you want another custom TCP rule, so you use the TCP protocol, you open a specific port that you want your application to be connected. So what this rule means that any IP address 0000 will be able to reach the instance which are in this security group on this specific port 4567. So what this line means is any IP address will be able to reach the instances which are in this security group to the port 80. And what this means is when you have a /32, that means only one IP address. So only the IP address of ending in this is one IP address. So only this machine will be able to SSH via port 22. Right? Any questions on this one? So what a security group is?
Sir, here you mentioned that 122.149.196.85/32. So if I remove the /32, it will be a single IP, right?
It is a single IP now.
Is it really mentioned to /32 here?
So slash
If it is
32
a
here,
single IP,
okay. Slash 32 means it's a single IP.
yes. I'm writing the full IP address here. So why the /32 you want to give here? It's a unique IP, and 32 means
No,
I can use one IP.
I think this is, you always need to define a range here. It only accepts side. I
Okay,
don't think it will accept just 85 and nothing. Correct me, Sanjeev?
okay, okay.
So there is this specific format you have to
Yeah.
follow.
I think you always have to define a CIDR range here.
Define the CIDR range is the IP range, IP address, and the how many
Yep.
IP range that /32 will specify how many of them.
Yep.
Okay.
So it's like a pool of IP, and a subnet will allow you to divide that pool into multiple IPs also. So you will understand that your entire VPC could be /16, but you can split that into multiple /20 subnets.
Okay, I got your point. Yes.
What I do.
Hi, sir.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a general understanding, like pretty much basic. So, these are the ways how you connect to. It could be server or it could be EC2, right? Like HTTP,
Yes,
SSH.
yes.
That's what you call security groups. Okay.
By default, within a security group, everything is denied. So let's say if you create an instance and you attach it, and you have to attach a security group there. So by default, if you don't open these ports, nobody will be able to access it. So that is how AWS prevents unauthorized accesses. It doesn't allow everybody in. It actually denies everybody in, and you have to especially open specific IP ranges and your specific port. Okay, clear? All right. Now, as I said, your single instance can be attached to multiple security groups. So if you look in this, let's say you got a security group one and security group one. All right, so this is just defining. So you have authorized. Okay, let me understand this first. So you got an EC2 instance. You got a security group inbound, and you got security group outbound. So your computer. All right. So there's a port 22 which is allowed for a specific IP address, and for example, we had a look at in here. So this port 22 is allowed with one IP address. So if you look at this IP address is allowed with the port 22, so it's able to communicate through this security group to the EC2 instance. But this IP address has a different IP than this address, right? So that means on the same port, this computer will not be able to communicate. So using the security group rules, you can control which IP address or which range of IP address can connect using which port to an EC2 instance in a security group. Now security group is stateful. So what it means is that if your traffic is able to come inside an instance, it can go outside your subnets, your security group and VPC. So outbound traffic, there is no limitation. Only the inbound traffic to the EC2 instances are limited using security group. So outbound traffic, it uses the same port to go out. Okay. Now security groups, few things. It can be attached to multiple instances. Security groups can be locked down to a region or VPC. It lives outside the EC2. So that means if a traffic is blocked, the EC2 instance won't be able to see it. So in most of the cases that you will see that, let's say you have launched a web server on your EC2 instance and you're not able to connect to a web server using the web page. Let's say port 80, you have installed an Apache server and you're not able to connect it. A connection refused or you can't see it using your browser. Most of the times, it will be your security group which is blocking it. So it's good to maintain one separate security group for SSH. Your application is not accessible, then it's a security group issue. If your application gives a connection refused, then it's an application error or it is not launched. But most of the time, if it is timeout or not accessible, then it's a security group. So all inbound traffic is blocked by default. You have to open specific ports in the group, but all outbound traffic is authorized by default. So it doesn't block any outbound traffic. If you need to block on outbound traffic, then you have to use your NACLs. Now we'll learn more about NACLs in next slides. All right. So this is again referencing other security groups. So let's say you've got multiple security groups here. So you've got security group 1, which is attached to an instance, security group 2. So these two groups, they are allowed for inbound entry, but the security group 3, let's say it doesn't allow the port 123. So the traffic can only be flowing in through using the IPs which are defined in these two security groups. But the IP which is defined using security group 3, that port will have to be opened in security group 3 so that it can reach. So your security group is very, very closely related to which range of IP and which port in order to allow the traffic to an existing instance. So classic ports. So these are very standard ports. So 22 is your SSH. So you log on to your Linux instance from your terminal or PuTTY or command line. So using port 22. 21 is your FTP, uploading file into a file share. 22 is also used for SFTP, uploading files using SSH. Port 80 is HTTP, which is unsecured websites, and 443 is HTTPS, and 3389 is your RDP. So if you have a Windows instance, you will have to open up port 3389 so that you can use the remote desktop.
Sir, I mean, just
Yeah.
a quick, maybe 2
Mhm.
minutes of time. So, can you maybe explain what is port actually?
What is a port? Okay. All the applications, whenever you launch an application, there is an endpoint to that application, right? So let's say you've got a website, uh, let's say google.com. So that website internally, it always uses some sort of port to be made available. A port is in a computer network. A port is the entry point through which the traffic goes inside a Linux box. So let's say if you have got a port 80 or port 8, port 443, so that means if you're launching up your Apache server, so it how do I explain it in layman term? Ports, let's say you've got a building and you want to enter the building. So all you would do, you need to find a door to enter the building, right? So these doors are similar to ports in an application. So you have a specific port through which you enter your application. So these are the doorways or endpoints to a specific application. Am I clear? I'm just trying to explain in layman terms.
Port for me is like, I would assume that when they say port, I visualize that some service is running on that port. So if somebody says that I have an application running on port 80, means some traffic is being served on port 80. So if I connect to that server on port 80, I should be able to. If somebody says that I'm running a FTP site somewhere, so that means something is running on port 21 unless it has been overwritten by another port. So that's how in TCP that you usually have a combination of an IP address, that where my services are running, and on what port it's running. So the port is, so always it's IP and port combination that we visualize in networking.
Okay.
So whenever let's say you're running a web browser, so your web browser will attempt to communicate with an application using two things. The one is your IP address, and the next one is your port. So it's a combination of IP address and port where your application is made available. It's not just the IP address. IP address correspond to a box, let's say Linux box, and IP address plus its port will correspond to a service which is provided by that box. So that service can be either a firewall service, or it can be an application running, or it can be a web application, or it can be a database. So any service which is being provided by the box outside network, it can only communicate through the IP address and the port. I'm hoping I'm able to explain it, but is that clear?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have an idea. Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right. Now, when you are trying to connect through your to your EC2 instance, there are a couple of ways that you can connect it with. So it depends on what machine you are using. So if you're using a Mac machine, you can directly SSH into it using port 22, or you can also use your EC2 instance connect. So this is a service that is given by AWS itself. So when you have Linux, if you're using Linux, you can SSH into it or use instance connect. For Windows, it can have multiple options. So you can have use PuTTY or you can use SSH or instance connect. So these are the ways in which you can connect to your EC2 instance once you have launched it. So regarding the SSH troubleshooting, if nothing works, just try to look at this lecture again. So, but if any of these should be able to work depending on what machine you are using in. So if you're using Windows, then using PuTTY or SSH, you can just directly connect it. The EC2 Instance Connect, it works mostly with your Amazon Linux. It doesn't work with your Red Hat.